Hi, I'm Femi. Okay, next week, Germans will be going to the polls and voting for a new Chancellor. Who can replace Angela Merkel? What are the big concerns of voters right now? And who are the top candidates? So much to pack into this episode of The Stream. But first, here's Angela Merkel speaking just a few weeks ago about her own legacy. Take a look.
In der Tat, das Wort Feminismus auch verbunden mit einer bestimmten Bewegung, die eben da sehr gekämpft hat, diese Dinge auf die gesellschaftliche Tagesordnung zu bringen. Und deshalb kam das mit den fremden Federn, mit denen ich mich nicht schmücken wollte. Mir hat dann Königin Máxima aus den Niederlanden ja schon das Tor geöffnet, indem sie gesagt hat, im Kern geht es doch darum, dass Männer und Frauen gleich sind im Sinne der Teilhabe am gesellschaftlichen Leben, am gesamten Leben. Und in diesem Sinne kann ich heute bejahend sagen, dann bin ich Feministin. Das habe ich ja damals auf der Bühne schon etwas schüchtern vorgebracht. Heute ist das besser durchdacht. Und deshalb, in diesem Sinne kann ich sagen, ja, wir sollten alle Feministen sein.
Wow. Yay! Applause there for Angela Merkel. Welcome your panel, everybody. I'm going to say hello to Oliver and Tom and Sophia. Nice to have you on board. Oliver, please tell everybody who you are, what you do.
I'm a correspondent, United States correspondent with Deutsche Welle. That's Germany's international broadcaster here in DC.
Good to have you. Hello, Tom. Introduce yourself to the Stream viewers.
Good evening from Berlin. I'm Tom Nuttall, the Berlin bureau chief for The Economist.
Nice to see you. And Sophia, welcome to the Stream. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Sophia Besch. I'm a senior research fellow at the Center for European Reform. That's a think tank, and I work on German foreign and defense policy.
We have such a great lineup, audience. Do not waste their talents and their expertise. We are on YouTube right now. In the comments section, put your thoughts, your questions right here, and you can be part of today's show. If we're talking guests about the legacy of Angela Merkel, that would take us weeks. It would take us really weeks to break that down. We're not going to do that. I'm going to give you each a little assignment. Sophia, Angela Merkel as a global leader on the world stage, what's her legacy?
It's a really good question because on foreign policy, on Germany's role in the world, Merkel has been pretty hesitant, actually, which might be surprising. She's not known for major speeches or decisions, changes in the field of foreign policy and defense. She sort of championed the usual German tropes, inclusivity, dialogue, moderation, including vis-à-vis China, commitment to NATO and the EU. But until the EU recovery package last year, there has been very little concrete follow-up. Instead, she's been, I think, a crisis manager that has won her a good reputation abroad as an anchor for stability, if you will, but it leaves Germany without much of a strategy to tackle the big future challenges like decarbonization of the economy or digitalization, or indeed what to do about Germany's role as a defense power within NATO.
Oliver, let's focus on missteps. 20 years, 16 years as German Chancellor. Missteps.
Yes, and that has been a long time, first of all, right? I mean, the longest-serving chancellor, together with Helmut Kohl, the chancellor during the time of the reunification in Germany. I think Jean-Claude Juncker was it. He had made a famous quote. He said, she did nothing, she did many things right, but no major thing wrong. And I think that characterizes her very well. And that's also what Sophia pointed out, that she was a very careful politician. She always tried to gather majorities around herself. It took a long time for her to come to conclusions sometimes. And that's where her problems also were. So she's certainly an anchor of stability over the last 16 years for Germany, for Europe. Certainly very important aspect of her legacy. But then on the other hand, she did not have a clear vision. She did not also fell short in solving some of the biggest problems that the European Union has, for instance.
Tom, I want to focus with you on successes, where you can look at Angela Merkel and say, this is her legacy. This is where people will remember her being the most successful. Tom.
Thing is, I mean, I think Sophia and Oliver have described it pretty well. You look back over 16 years, it's quite a long time for someone to be in office. But it's quite difficult to point to any kind of decisive moments at which Angela Merkel had a kind of particular vision that she decided to execute, either for Germany or for Europe or for the world. What you had really, I think, were two things. One was a very strong ability to manage crises, and we had a lot of those, particularly in Europe in the first half of the 2010s. You find Angela Merkel at the heart of them, from the Eurozone crisis to refugees to Russia and Ukraine, you name it. And the second thing is a kind of a method, a way of trying to solve problems. And what you see with Merkel time and time again, both domestically and internationally, is this method of trying to bring everybody to the table, to hear everybody's point of view, to negotiate all night long if necessary, and crucially, to delay making any big decisions until the last possible moment, until you have no choice but to make those decisions. That was her way of managing crises. Sometimes that led to quite big costs, particularly in managing the Eurozone crisis. But that, I think, is the legacy, more sort of a method than sort of a vision or an ideology.
I would bring in the voice of Dr. Jan Beurs. He is at Trinity College in Dublin, and this is what he told us a little bit earlier.
Angela Merkel's legacy is mixed. Her consensus-oriented and pragmatic leadership style have guided Germany well throughout the financial and economic crisis, and Germany has seen more economic growth than other developed countries. But it is also because of this pragmatic leadership style that she has failed to address significant issues like the threat to liberal democracy within the European Union, and because of her pragmatism, she has also failed to use opportunities like the 2015 refugee crisis to develop a vision of Germany as a migration country. She leaves her successor a prosperous Germany in need of political visions.
Tom, you're sitting there in Berlin. I'm just wondering what her ratings are right now. They're high, aren't they?
They are staggeringly high.
Yeah. If she wanted to run, it's like, if I run again, she'd win. Yeah.
I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. I mean, her approval ratings are above 80%. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Above 80%. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and what's really striking is that if you look at the ratings for the candidates who are vying to replace her as Chancellor, they are a fraction of that. And what's really been really interesting about this election campaign is watching all of them in their different ways, I think, try to appeal to what is a very sort of moderate centrist electorate, the electorate that Merkel was so good at reaching, but I think they've all sort of fallen short in their own ways.
Yeah. Popularity. Sophie, you go first, and I'm going to get Oliver to go. Go ahead.
It's so interesting because I agree what Tom was saying. And it's so funny because we're looking almost for the next Merkel, right? Germany is looking for the next Merkel. But her pitch was one of stability and humility. And because all candidates are trying to position themselves as the next Merkel, we're almost looking for the least charismatic, most centrist candidate. And I think we've seen that in an election campaign that has been void of ideas, really.
Oliver, go ahead.
Yeah, and it was a very interesting election campaign, wasn't it? And especially now if you look at three candidates, and I think that's actually a very important aspect here of this election, that we have never seen a situation where actually three parties will be necessary to form a coalition. So we have a real shift there in German politics right now, and that's perhaps interesting also for your international audiences, that this has not happened before. So there is this kind of erosion from what we've seen in Germany, that stability we were talking about before, everyone has addressed of us, where usually two parties were trying to make the deal and trying to find out who the next chancellor will be. Right now, first of all, we don't know it at all, so that it's really a very close race.
Is that an academic way of saying we have no idea?
Exactly.
We have no idea what's going to happen on Sunday.
The less academic
Tom,
approach.
go ahead.
But
The weird thing about this election is that on the one hand, in kind of like horse race terms and who's going to win and who's up and down in the polls, it's been absolutely extraordinary. We've had three different parties in the lead in the last 4 or 5 months. Wow. Huge uncertainty about what's going to happen on Sunday and afterwards when they have to put a government together. Yeah. On the other hand, as Sophia was saying a moment ago, the campaign has actually been about nothing at all other than personalities and parties and candidates. It's had no proper themes. It really hasn't had much substance, which is really worrying given the number of challenges that Germany is going to have to confront in the years ahead.
So guess we're going to look and do this breakdown of who the candidates are. But first, here's Sven. He's thinking about who the next person has to be? What kind of qualities do they have to be the next German Chancellor? Here he is.
This is an unprecedented election for Germany in many ways. Actually, the current Chancellor, Angela Merkel, is not running for office again, so we will definitely get a new Chancellor. And that means that for many voters, the question of whom to entrust with running the country has gained prominence over the last few weeks. And it seems that they're looking for a safe pair of hands, which seems to benefit the current Finance Minister Olaf Scholz, Social Democrat.
I'm going to go through some of the top contenders in just a moment. But Sophia, what was on your mind? You're about to say something. Go ahead, say it.
No, I was just thinking about the fact that it's because they're trying to be Merkel that it's been boring, but it's also, I think that after 16 years of this, what Sven just called this safe hand politics, Germany has been anesthetized to a degree. I think we have lost our practice of fighting over issues.
Right.
And as a result, this campaign has been very process heavy.
All right, Tom, I'm going to borrow your brain here. Let's take a look at some of the top candidates. I'm just going to put 4 up here, and I'm just going to get you to do a single line, right? A single sentence. So let's start with the CDU, Christian Democratic Union. Who's this gentleman?
Armin Laschet is the leader of the Christian Democrats, Angela Merkel's party, and the candidate for that party and its Bavarian sister party, the CSU, tried to position himself as centrist successor to Merkel. He's had an absolutely disastrous campaign.
Social Democratic Party. Let's pop out that leader.
So here's Olaf Scholz. He's the finance minister and the vice chancellor in the current government, because the SPD and the CDU-CSU are in a grand coalition at the moment. He's sort of the opposite. He'd been written off for years. The SPD were really, really struggling. And literally just in the last 4 to 6 weeks, the SPD under Olaf Scholz has staged an extraordinary comeback, and he's now the front runner to be the next chancellor.
It literally is like a horse race. The Green Party. Tom, keep going. Good job.
Green Party. Annalena Baerbock, the first ever candidate for the Chancellor, for the Chancellery from the Green Party. She's a co-leader of the party with a man called Robert Habeck. They briefly, when she became the candidate in April, the Greens briefly soared to the top of the polls. It was an extraordinary moment. Didn't last very long. She's made a few mistakes, but they're still on course to have a very good election result, and she will probably be in the next coalition government.
And the FDP, why are they even on this graphic? Free Democratic Party. What influence could they possibly have?
There's a very good reason to have them on the graphic. Christian Lindner, the leader of the party, is not going to be chancellor. FDP is a small liberal, pro-business, tax-cutting party. But this party, could be absolutely crucial to putting the next coalition government together, because they will be needed to make up the numbers. So which way they choose to go is going to be absolutely crucial in the days and weeks after the election.
Oliver, I have total respect for you saying you have no clue what is going to happen on Sunday. What do you want to share with us about what you feel is going to happen? What are the voters going to go for?
I've just seen so many wild cards there right now that they usually shouldn't be historically. I think in the past it was clear that if you look at the governments that we had in Germany after the Second World War, it was usually mostly the conservative CDU together with the liberal, business-friendly FDP, perhaps, and then in later stages, you had a little bit more of the Social Democrats, especially under Merkel, with 3 grand coalitions. So right now we're having the situation where everyone has more or less the same, the same in polling. You had Laschet, who had this disastrous campaign, as Tom pointed out, who's very unpopular, in fact, among people. He had this faux pas, for instance, where we had this flood catastrophe in Germany with almost 200 people killed, and he was caught in the sidelines of a press conference smiling and really having a hearty joke. And that really didn't fare well. And then he turned around very often, had a lot of U-turns in his policies, and so on and so forth. So that really makes him the unlikely candidate. But in recent days, I have to say that he's kept up and he's getting closer to his contender of the Social Democrats. So it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, so Sophia, who do you feel will work best on the global stage? Angela Merkel has a very distinct presence. Who, from those 4 candidates that we looked at, do you feel could actually have a good presence on the international stage?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think what we almost know for certain, and not to be pessimistic here, but Germany is going to lose some of its influence and some of its power on the global stage with Merkel leaving, and that's not just down to what I think is a relative weakness of the candidate. That's also that she had 16 years of experience, 16 years of grip on both the national system and also international system within Europe, on the global stage. She had relationships, she had influence, but also because, and it's unfortunate about the German elections that they don't lend themselves very well to theater. After the elections, we won't really know who's chancellor. We'll have months probably of coalition negotiations, and then we're likely to end up with a quite fragmented coalition between three parties that might not really agree on foreign policy. So we're almost certain to be a bit weaker on the world stage afterwards. I think that Annalena Baerbock had a very strong pitch on foreign policy, and she did very well on a global audience. I mean, she was the darling of Washington when she came here in the spring. But it's unlikely that she will be chancellor. Between Laschet and Scholz, I have to go with what I think Tom's
Sophia is calling it. Sophia, you're calling the election? You are a bold woman.
I'm calling who will be most respected on the global stage, and I think that Scholz
that's a different
has a better chance.
All right, that's a different thing.
I think that Scholz has a better chance, but I am a bit like The Economist, which is Tom's outlet. They have, I think, embraced Scholz, but it's the most lackluster embrace I have ever seen.
That's about right. I think there's something to add, which is a particular kind of European dimension on this, which is that my impression is that although, as we were saying before, I think Germans will be sad to see Angela Merkel leave. She remains very, very popular. I think much of the rest of Europe is not just sad, but actually very nervous about the prospect of seeing Angela Merkel leave. Because if you look back at the 15, 16 years that she's been in office, she has been at the heart of everything that Europe has done. And she's forged these really strong relationships. She's absolutely placed Germany at the heart of Europe. Look at any European country, and their strongest relationship in most cases is with Germany. When she's gone, there isn't going to be anybody else in Europe who can fill that void. Emmanuel Macron doesn't enjoy the same sort of trust or confidence from other places. Mario Draghi, Prime Minister of Italy, is liked and respected, but Italy doesn't have the same clout as Germany does. And of course, whoever the next German Chancellor is going to, at the very least, need a good amount of time to kind of get their feet under the desk. So there's going to be a bit of a void at the heart of Europe, and I think people are quite nervous about that.
All right, guests, I have so many questions and thoughts from you from our live YouTube audience. I'm going to throw them out to you. I want an instant reaction back. Not deep analysis, but instant gut reaction back. Oliver's looking at me. All right, Kimberly, Angela Merkel is one of a kind. She is a powerful woman. She doesn't know who can replace her. Is that a feeling that you're also getting from the German public as you're doing your reporting?
Well, I don't understand the question. She doesn't know who to replace her.
She doesn't know. I think the idea is she can't conceive who could possibly replace her. Well, somebody will, obviously.
Yeah, she's been out on the street supporting Laschet, of course, in recent days, because she sees that it's not moving the way she wants to. But it's certainly big footsteps, you know. And the big question, of course, is the stability one. Will the next government then be as stable as the one before? That's what people wonder right now. What's going to happen, you know? This is such a long time, 16 years. I mean, I just came out of university when Angela Merkel took office for the first time. A lot of people have never, you know, the younger folks have never seen anyone else in power. It's a big deal.
Let me bring in another comment. This one's from Hermes on YouTube. Thank you for being part of the show. Sophia, this one is for you. Foreign policy. How does Germany intend to position itself towards China, Russia, given the recent AU, KUS, Australia, KU, security alliance? Australia, UK, United States alliance. This is a quick one, Sophia. Make it fast.
Easy, quick question. Just Russia, China, and the transatlantic relationship. Yes. So really briefly, I think on China, we'll see some change in Germany, no matter who comes into office, because the German consensus on China is changing from a really mercantilist approach, a bit naive, perhaps trying to include China in the global system, to a more confrontational approach, closely aligning itself with the US. On Russia, there's going to be continuity. I think Nord Stream 2 is done. That's the issue that everyone talks about. That's sort of done. The sanctions are at the heart of Germany's Russia policy. And they will likely continue again under each chancellor. Defense spending is the one that people tend to talk about globally, and there I can only say that no German is particularly fond of the 2% defense spending goal. So we're likely to see disappointing results for those who were hoping for more there. I think the question mentions the AUKUS debacle over the last couple of weeks. Germany has been pretty quiet on that. They don't fall in line with the French pitch for European sovereignty as opposed to the close transatlantic relationship. I'm putting this in very simple terms. They're really keen to maintain a close relationship with the US and not get too involved in conflict over that in the Indo-Pacific.
All right, yes, one more thing to do. We've definitely got value from you today, and that is a key issue that voters will be voting on. This is what Stefan told us earlier. Tom, come off the back of this video immediately with what you believe is a key issue that voters will be contemplating as they go to the polls on Sunday. First, Stefan.
The number one issue the German public is concerned with in this general election is, according to the polls, the climate crisis. We've had a major flash flooding event with 170 fatalities and tens of billions of euros of damage in West Germany this summer. That's in line with the general increase in extreme precipitation on a warming planet, together, of course, with increased heat waves, droughts, stronger tropical cyclones, and so on. And almost all parties in German parliament pay lip service to the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal of the Paris Climate Agreement, but none of them have a viable policy for what is a fair contribution of Germany to the Paris Agreement.
I mean, you're talking to a climate researcher, so maybe it wasn't surprising that he said that climate's going to be very important, but he's right. I mean, we were saying before that this campaign isn't really about anything, but to the extent that it's focused on any particular policy areas, climate is definitely close to the top of the list, maybe at the top of the list. And there have at times been actually some quite rich, substantial debates on between the parties on how they would hope to lead Germany towards what are now actually quite ambitious emission reduction targets by 2030 and 2045. For me, the frustrating thing has been that while there's been lots of talk about, to what extent you have to regulate versus leave it to the market, to what extent German industry is going to be able to make the transition from what it's doing now to what it needs to do in the future, it's been completely or almost completely divorced from the global context. And Germany is responsible for about, I think, 2% of global carbon emissions. What it does is important, and it's important for Europe, and what's important for Europe is important for the world. But that stuff you haven't really heard about in this debate. It's as if, Germany can solve the global climate crisis on its own.
All right, I'm going to give you one thought here, Oliver, because we're almost at the end of the show, and I want to fit Sophia in as well. One thought for what will be influencing German voters on Sunday. One thought.
Yeah, I think he pointed it out, Tom. Climate change is above all a very important topic, and what's interesting is that that you have now the Green Party coming out so strong. They were all stealing a little bit from the Green Party because they're more or less on the same page when it comes to climate change, and in certainly different shades, but they're all moving in the same direction.
Sophia.
So judging from the past, what German voters care about in the privacy of the election booth is stability. They've been conservative for years, small c conservative. The question is whether the current upheaval globally and in Germany and with climate crisis has actually made a change in the German collective mind and lead them to vote more for sort of future program for Germany, or if they were going to go back to vote for stability and centrism.
Yes, thank you so much, Sophia and Tom and Oliver, for giving us a whirlwind trip around German elections, some of the candidates, some of the thinking from Germany, how others are seeing Germany from outside Germany as well. Really appreciate it. It's a great primer for Sunday. Let me just show you here on my laptop where you can actually follow our guests. Deutsche Welle News is Oliver's outlet. Sophia is here at Sophia Besch. And Tom, Tom Nuttall, Tom_Nuttall. You can follow Tom and see how he is reporting, how Sophia is actually talking about Germany past and post Angela Merkel, and how Deutsche Welle is as well. Thank you for your questions. They were excellent. I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.